Okay. We are on Ayin Tes 79. The Mishnah said that the shear for eating on Yom Kippur is like a koiseves agasa, which is a large date. Boy Rav Papa. Koiseves sha'amru bigarinasa or below garinasa. When we say a koiseves is the shear of Isra Achil on Yom Kippur, is it a date which has its pit or without its pit? Boy Ravashi. In the same line, etzem kisoira. There's a din that tumas hameis is conveyed by a piece of bone, which is the size of a sa'ora. Now, biklipasa or below biklipasa? Is this barley bean size, is it with its shell or not with its shell? Bilacha or biyavesha? Is it moist or dry? Ravashi lama baile hadrav papa. Ravashi didn't have the shaila regarding the date, whether when the Mishnah says a date, does it mean with the pit or without the pit? Because gasa itmar, kol kama de gasa. When the Mishnah said koiseves hagasa, gasa refers to big, it's referring to the date that's the biggest size, which is the date that has its pit. So that's why Ravashi didn't have a shaila regarding that. And Rav Papa Loma Boyle had Ravashi. Rav Papa likewise didn't have the same shaila Ravashi had, because alacha, a moist barley is shiboilis mikri. It's not called, so it's called a shiboilis. And shalobik klipasa, barley without its shell, is ushla mikri. So it's clear, according to Rav Papa, that when it says etzem kisoira, it's referring to dry with its klipa. Rav Yehuda, koiseves hagasa sha'amru, this plump date that we say is the shear for Isra Achil and Yom Kippur, you say Remikabetza. You should know we have some classic measurements when it comes to food. We have, of course, kazayas, which is usually the standard for most achila in the Torah. Then you have kibetza, and then now you have this koiseves. So the Gemara now is going to go through a whole diyun. Is a koiseves larger than a kibetza, or is it smaller than a kibetza? Where does it fit in this pantheon between kazayas and kibetza? So Rav Yehuda says koiseves agasa sha'anu is yisera mikibetza. It's a hierarchy. We have kazayas, betza, and then koiseves agasa, which is larger. The kimluhu l'rabbanon, de bahachi miyais v'daita. The issue on Yom Kippur is something called yishuv adas. It's not just achila. It's an achila that's going to satisfy the person. It's going to give him yishuv adas. And then there's no inui anymore. So the bahachi miyas v'daita, that if it's koiseves agasa, which is according to Rav Yehuda bigger than a kibetza, it's going to be, the person is going to have yishuv adas, and that's why that's the shear that if you ate it, you violated inui. But less than that, lo miyas v'daita. If a person ate less than a koiseves agasa, let's say according to the way Rav Yehuda is learning, he ate a kibetza, that's not enough to do. It would be not enough to violate the proscription of inui. So meisvei, ma'asav evil Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai litom es atavshil. On Sukkos, They brought Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai some cooked food to taste. They brought Rabbi Gamliel 2 kosevets worth of food and a pail of water. The Amru Helum Sukkah. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Gamliel told them it's sukkahs. We have to eat it in the sukkah. V'tani Allah, and a baraisa on this case, lo mitnei shehalacha kach, that you cannot eat or taste these things outside of the sukkah. Really, you can. Ela sheratzu lachmir alatzman. They wanted to be machmir, that they didn't want to eat anything outside the sukkah. Even though meikra din, they could eat these things. Rav Tzaddik, when they gave to Rav Tzaddik, oichel pachos mikabetza, he made sure to eat less than a kabetza, and not lo b'mapa, he actually didn't touch it. He used like a handkerchief to touch the food. V'achlo chutz l'sukkah, he ate it outside of the sukkah. V'lo birech achrav, and he didn't make a bracha afterwards. You know why, says the Gemara? Because it was less than kabetza. Ha-kabetza, boy, sukkah. But if it was the size of kabetza, it would have required a sukkah. Now, if you want us to accept what you said, that a koseves agasa, that shear is larger, so that doesn't make any sense. Hashtag sheikh shavis below garina. You have 2 dates without their pit. Lo havi kabetza, because Rab Gamliel said mikra din, they don't have to eat it inside of the sukkah. So koseves agasa v'garinasim havi yiser mikabetza. So one koseves with a pit, it's not going to be bigger than kabetza. The Gemara is trying to make the argument now that a koseves agasa is less than kabetza. So the Gemara says, no. Amrav Yirmiyah in shtei koseves below garinas lo havi kabetza. 2 dates without their pit, ein chanami, will be smaller than a kabetza. But koseves agasa v'garinas havi yiser mikabetza. So no riot from there against what Rav Yehuda said, that a koseves agasa is larger than a kabetza. Amrav Papa, that's why people say, trei kabi de tamri, 2 kabs of dates, chad kab de kashisa usriach. There's usually 1 and a little bit of pits. So really, when you have a date, the majority of the date is the pit. Rava Amar Hasan.
But Ernie, the pit itself is not a chila. How would that be included in the pit itself?
We're just talking about the size. We're talking about the volume that it displaces.
I understand, but you take the pit. But if you ate a date and it had the pit in it, you wouldn't be. Why would you be over? Even though the size is bigger, but it's not food. What you're eating inside is not food. You're just eating the date, which it doesn't cover.
If you have a piece of bread the size of a date with a pit, so on Yom Kippur, then you'll be over inui. If you eat volume of bread less than the date with its pit, you're not over inui. We're not talking about eating the date. The date is the sheep, like a kibetza or a kazayas. So we're not talking about the date. We're talking about eating any food.
It's a volume.
It's a volume. It's displaced volume. Amrav Papa, Rava Amar Hasamainu Taima. You know what? Why they didn't necessarily have to eat these things in the sukkah? Because Havale Peri, Uperi, Lo Boy Sukkah, it's a fruit. And fruit, there's no chiyuv to eat in the sukkah when you eat fruit. No matter what the shear is. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim Tafresh Lamed Tes says you can eat and drink. You eat and drink in the sukkah all 7 days. If you're going to eat you're just going to snack on something. You're not being koiveya suda. Now, we're going to see the shear for sukkah is kibetza. So if you ate bread less than kibetza, a suda outside the sukkah, that's you can drink as much as you want and eat as much food you want outside. However, whoever's machmir on himself to eat everything in the sukkah, he's praiseworthy. But mikra din, peiros and other things that are not bread, or you're not kovei suda on, is not chayiv sukkah. Meisvei. By the way, well, we'll go back to that when we're through with the sugya here. Meisvei, Amar Rebbe, when we were studying Torah by Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, they brought in front of us figs and grapes. This was sukkahs. We ate them sort of in a temporary fashion outside the sukkah. Achilas haroy in, achilas keva loy. But for example, if they were going to eat a meal, and their meal was going to be figs and grapes, and they're going to sit down and eat a ton of it, and there's going to be kovei suda on it, you'd have to eat in the sukkah. So, ema in a chanami, achalnum kachilas haroy chutz l'sukkah. We ate them in a fashion of a temporary eating, not a kaviyas in suda outside the sukkah. Or iboy say machalnum achilas keva. This sheet holds you can even eat the sudas keva of peiros outside the sukkah. But the bread we ate outside the sukkah in achilas haroy, which we learned has to be less than kibetz. Lema Messiah. Let us say that the following supports that. Lefichach im hishli b'mine targima. Let's say if he ate a shear that requires sukkah from other kinds of like appetizers and sweets, yotza, you're in the sukkah and you have to eat a certain amount of food, and you finish the amount with mine targima, you're yotze. Now, if you're required to eat fruit in the sukkah, and you're mekayim the mitzvah of sukkah with fruit, why did you say mine targima, lisni peiros? Must be a raya that there's no chiyuv peiros in the sukkah. My mine targima peiros. In fact, that's what it meant when it said targima. It meant peiros. They used targima because they didn't have fruit. So up until now, Rav Yehuda said koiseves agasa is bigger than kibetza. Rav Zvid Amar koiseves agasa she'anu chaser mi kibetza. No, the hierarchy is kazayis, koiseves agasa, and then kibetza. How do you know this? This not Beis Shammai Omrim that it says in the pasuk by Pesach, don't eat saor and don't eat chametz. Kol saor v'chol chametz, it mentions both. Saor like a starter dough. It is dough that ferments other dough. So it's got a stronger leavening than regular chametz. So Beis Shammai says saor b'kazayis, chametz b'kekoseves. To trigger the isser for eating chametz. So, or all you have to do is eat a kazayas. Regular chametz is a koiseves. The avinam, but we analyze this. My time in the Beis Shammai. Nichtav rachmana chametz v'lo boisor. The Torah should have just said, "Don't eat chametz," and it didn't have to write anything about seor. The ano amina, and I would have understood. Uma chametz she'en chimutz or kasha. Aser bechazayis, because any time in the Torah where it says loy soichal, it always means kazayis. So if it just said chametz loy soichal, and chametz is chimutz, so it's not that strong, the isra will be kazayis. So or shechimutz kasha loy kasha. Normally, I would know that so or that has this leavening. It certainly would be aser b'kazayis. Midalginu rachmana, from the fact that the Torah separated the two and gave me a separate isser for seor and for chametz. Shiur shel zeh lo k'shir shel zeh. They have different shiurim to trigger the isser. Seor b'chazayis, the chametz b'koiseves. Now here comes the proof. If you're going to tell me that the koiseves hagasa is larger than kibetza, so if Beis Shammai wants to take a step up from kazayas, why would he take the step to koiseves? Listening kibetza. If the shear is kazayas betza koiseves, and chametz is and now you give me two so far as also kazayas, and you want to say chametz is also in the next amount, it should be betza, not koiseves. Or if you're going to tell me vinami ki adadi ninu, or maybe you're going to tell me maybe koiseves agasa is exactly kabetza, still nisni kabetza. Why are you coming up with this newfangled shear that we don't see anywhere else in Shas? We know kazayas, we know kabetza. It's nisni kabetza. Elalav shmami no must be koiseves pchusami kabetza. That really koiseves agasa is less than kabetza, and the shear is kazayas, koiseves, and then betza. And for the Gemara Mimai, there's no proof. Maybe we could say that the koiseves agasa that we're dealing with is larger than kabetza. And a stam koiseves, not a koiseves agasa, is kabetza. So that's one teretz of the Gemara. Or v'inami ki adodininu. Really, perhaps they're the same. Koiseves agasa and kabetza. V'chad minayu nokat. And it mentioned one of them. It could have mentioned betza. It could have mentioned koiseves agasa. So the Gemara says, if you're going to say that, I'll bring you another problem. The Gemara asks in Brachas, Ad kama mizamnin. The chiyuv zimun, to say the benching with three people, how much do they have to eat in order for it to require zimun? Ad kazayis de Reb Meir. Reb Meir says they have to eat a kazayis. Reb Yehuda Omer ad kabetza. Reb Yehuda says it's kabetza. The ma'ika miflagi. What's the nakuda of the machlokas? Reb Meir savar ve'achalta v'savali rachta. So the achalta zu achila. The savata zu shasiya. Right? Being satiated, he says, doesn't mean satiated. It means it's referring to drinking. And achila bekazayas. Like everywhere else in the Torah. Whenever it says achila, it always means kazayas. So here as well, it means kazayas. Rabbi Yehuda savar v'achalta v'savata. Achila sheyes posfia. It's not any kind of eating. It's eating that brings you to satiation. Ve'ezeh kabetza. It's a larger shear than a kazayas. It's kabetza. Now, Isa kadaita koiseves agasa sha'anu. You say remi kabetza. If you're going to tell me that the koiseves agasa is larger than a kabetza, hashta kabetza svui mispa. If betza satiates Are you going to tell me daita lo miyasva? So remember, Yom Kippur requires yishuv das. So the Gemara right now is understanding that satiation is certainly going to cause yishuv das. Yishuv das means I'm not hungry anymore. I was hungry, but I'm not hungry anymore. So if Beitza does it, certainly Koseves is going to do it. And the way to think about it is, Kebetza mazbo, kakoseves miyas v'daita. That means regular eating is kazayas, but you don't have yishuv adas yet. So you eat koseves agasa, so that gets yishuv adas, but that's not satiation. Satiation is a third level, which is kebetza. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch and Orach Chaim Taf Reish Yud Beis says, Shir koseves hu pachas ktsas mikebetza. So they paskin like Rav Zvid, not like Rav Yehuda. That koseves agas is a little bit less than kebetza. Tira ki psak alacho kedivri Rav Ashi, shir koseves hi k'nafach koseves kamoa im garinasa. It's like Rav Ashi who said that it's with its garin, but it's less than kebetza. Okay, so that's
Mashu,
it's a
Chametz b'Pesach.
it's a yisoid.
When it says Chametz b'Pesach,
Chametz b'Pesach
Chametz b'Pesach,
is b'kazayim.
when it says Mashu, that only applies to ownership, not eating, right? You're not over if you eat Mashu, are you? On
No.
Pesach?
Over means car race is only kazayas. Kazayas. You need kazayas to get your
Kazai. So Mashu is the Rabbanan then, right?
When we say Asr b'mashuhu, there's no bittul. You understand? Normally, by other isurim, echad b'shishim, so it's you can eat it. That means if you can't eat it l'chatchila.